Don't embarrass me, Clara. Those 4 words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I stood there in our kitchen, still holding the fork I'd been using to set the dinner table, my hand frozen mid-reach. My husband Dorian leaned against the counter, his tie loosened, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of the roast I'd spent 2 hours preparing. "You're too plain for my colleagues," he continued, swirling the whiskey in his glass like he was discussing the weather. "Stay in your lane at the gala next week. Smile, be polite, but don't draw attention to yourself. Have you ever had someone you loved look at you like you're an embarrassment? Like you're something they have to apologize for just by existing?" That's what his eyes said that Tuesday evening. Not anger.
Worse.
Indifference. I should have thrown that fork. I should have screamed. But instead I smiled. I nodded.
Sure, Dorian.
Whatever you say. He took another sip, satisfied with my obedience, and walked away to check his phone. He had no idea what he'd just done. No clue that his words had cracked something deep inside me, something that had been bending for years, but never quite breaking. Until now. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. See, Dorian thought he knew me. The quiet wife from the modest family. The schoolteacher's daughter who married up. The woman who wore dresses that cost more than her childhood car, who smiled at his colleagues' parties even when they talked past her like she was furniture. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known because I never told him, was that I wasn't just some simple woman who got lucky. My grandmother, God rest her soul, had taught me something precious before she died. She taught me patience. She taught me silence. And she taught me that the quietest person in the room often holds the most power. For 3 years, I'd been managing an inheritance Dorian knew nothing about. Properties scattered across 3 states. Apartment buildings. Strip malls. And most importantly, a majority share in a historic building downtown. The very building that housed his precious gentleman's club. The exclusive place where he and his wealthy colleagues gathered every week to smoke cigars, discuss deals, and apparently laugh about their plain wives. I owned his playground. I just hadn't bothered to play yet. But standing there that night, watching him dismiss me like I was some servant he had to manage, I decided it was time to stop being quiet. Not with screaming. Not with tears. With something far more devastating. I was going to let him keep talking.
Keep dismissing me.
Keep believing I was too plain, too simple, too beneath him. And then, at his precious gala, in front of all those important people he wanted so desperately to impress, I was going to show him exactly who owned the lane he told me to stay in. My grandmother used to say, "Diamonds shine bright, Clara, but pressure reveals cracks." For years, I thought she was talking about me. About staying strong under Dorian's subtle cruelty, his endless corrections, his disappointed sighs. But that night, I finally understood. She wasn't talking about me at all.
She was talking about him.
What Dorian didn't know was that his words had just awakened the wrong woman. And by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. Have you ever smiled at someone while planning their humiliation? It's a strange feeling. Powerful. Terrifying. Absolutely intoxicating. I had 7 days until the gala. 7 days to prepare. 7 days until my husband learned the most expensive lesson of his life. That the woman he told to stay in her lane actually owned the entire road. I wasn't always the woman who smiled through insults. There was a time when I believed love could bridge any gap, fill any silence, smooth any rough edge. I learned that from my parents. My father taught history at the local high school, coming home every evening with chalk dust on his sleeves and stories about students who finally understood the Civil War or the Great Depression. My mother owned a small bakery on 5th Street, the kind of place where the smell of cinnamon rolls pulled people in from 2 blocks away. We didn't have much. Vacations meant camping trips in our beat-up station wagon. New clothes came once a year before school started. Christmas presents were practical, wrapped in newspaper comics, because my mother said fancy paper was a waste of money that could buy another bag of flour. But we had something Dorian's family never did. We had respect for each other. My grandmother lived with us during my teenage years. She was my mother's mother, a thin woman with sharp eyes and hands that never stopped moving. She knitted, She gardened. She read the financial section of a newspaper every morning with her coffee. I thought she was just keeping her mind busy. I had no idea she was building an empire. Clara, she'd say, pulling me aside during family dinners, never show all your cards. Not to friends, not to lovers, not even to family sometimes. People treat you differently when they know what you're worth. I was 16. I thought she was talking about self-respect, about not being too eager for attention. I didn't know she meant it literally. She died during my second year of college. The lawyer called me into his office alone, without my parents. That's when I learned about the properties. 4 apartment buildings, 2 strip malls, and a controlling share in a historic downtown property that housed several businesses, including an exclusive club. Your grandmother was very specific, the lawyer said, sliding papers across his desk. Everything goes to you. Not your mother. You. She said you'd need it someday, and you'd know when that day came. I was 20 years old, suddenly worth more than my parents had earned in their entire lives combined. And I told no one. Not because I was ashamed, but because my grandmother's voice echoed in my head. Wait, Clara.
Watch.
Learn who people are when they think you have nothing.
So I did.
I lived modestly, finished college, managed the properties through the lawyer, and watched the money grow, while I pretended to be just another girl trying to figure out life. Then I met Dorian Hale at a charity fundraiser. Tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He approached me at the wine table, asked about my dress, a simple blue thing I'd bought on sale, and told me I had excellent taste. He made me feel seen, special, like I mattered in a room full of people who usually looked right through girls like me. That was his gift, making you feel chosen. I fell for it completely. For 2 years, I tried to become the woman he wanted. I bought designer dresses I didn't recognize. I learned which fork to use at fancy dinners. I memorized names of his colleagues, laughed at jokes I didn't understand, and stood beside him at parties where everyone discussed stock options and vacation homes in the Hamptons. His friends' wives had a way of looking at me. Not hostile exactly. More like curious. Like they were trying to figure out what Dorian saw in the schoolteacher's daughter. What I was doing in their world. I wondered that myself sometimes. The comments started small. Maybe try red lipstick next time, Clara. It's more sophisticated. Or you don't need to mention your mother's bakery so much. These people won't relate. Each one was a tiny cut, easy to ignore alone. But together, they bled me slowly. Still, I smiled. I adjusted. I tried harder. Because I loved him. Or maybe I loved the idea of being loved by someone like him. Someone who seemed so sure of everything, so comfortable in spaces where I felt like an imposter. My grandmother's voice whispered warnings I ignored. Pressure reveals cracks, Clara. I thought she meant I needed to be stronger. I didn't realize she was talking about him. The night he told me I was too plain, too embarrassing for his colleagues, something finally clicked. All those small cuts, all that slow bleeding, suddenly made sense. He'd never loved me. He'd love having someone who made him feel superior. Someone he could shape and correct and improve like a project. And I'd let him. But here's the thing about quiet people. We don't stay quiet forever. We just wait for the right moment. That moment was coming. 1 week away. What Dorian didn't know was that while he'd been busy dismissing me, I'd been learning. Watching. Growing roots so deep underground that when I finally broke through the surface, nothing would stop me. My grandmother's inheritance wasn't just money. It was power, freedom, and most deliciously, it was leverage over the one place Dorian valued most. His precious club, his kingdom, his proof that he belonged among the elite. I owned it. Every brick, every chandelier, every leather chair where he sat discussing deals he thought made him important. The gala was in 7 days. 7 days until I stopped being the dismissed wife and became the woman his colleagues would bow to. 7 days until Dorian learned the most important lesson anyone ever taught me. Never underestimate the quiet one. The wedding was Dorian's show, and I was just the leading lady he'd cast. June 14th, 3 years before that kitchen conversation that would change everything. The church was massive, stone columns reaching towards stained glass windows that threw colored light across white roses and silk ribbons. Dorian had insisted on this venue. His family's church, he'd said, where 3 generations of Hales had been married. What he meant was, this is where people who matter get married. My side of the church was smaller. My parents sat in the front row, my father uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, my mother dabbing tears with a handkerchief she'd embroider herself. Behind them, teachers from my father's school, regulars from my mother's bakery, neighbors who'd watched me grow up. People who loved me not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. Dorian's side overflowed. His fraternity brothers, loud and confident. His colleagues from the investment firm already networking between pews. His mother's society friends, women with perfect hair and critical eyes. His father's business associates, men who measured worth in square footage and stock portfolios. 2 different worlds, meeting in the middle.
I should have seen the warning then.
My grandmother sat in the front row beside my parents, wearing a simple navy dress. She caught my eye as I walked down the aisle and squeezed my hand when I passed. That squeeze said everything her mouth didn't. Remember what I taught you, child. Remember. But I was 23, and in love, or what I thought was love. Dorian looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so confident, so sure this was right. When he took my hand at the altar, I believed we could bridge any gap, overcome any difference. The reception was held at the country club. Not the one I would eventually own, but another equally exclusive place where the champagne flowed and the orchestra played and everything sparkled with expensive perfection. Dorian's friends surrounded us constantly. They toasted, laughed, shared stories about college parties and spring breaks in places I'd never been. The women admired my dress, a designer gown Dorian's mother had insisted on buying. You'll represent the Hale family now, dear. We have standards. I'd wanted my mother's friend to make my dress. Something simple, personal, meaningful. But Dorian had smiled that charming smile and said, let's not start our marriage by insulting my mother, Clara. Pick your battles.
So I wore the dress.
Smiled in the photographs. Danced with people whose names I'd forget by morning. My father pulled me aside during the reception, his eyes searching mine. Are you happy, Clara? Of course, Dad.
Why?
You seem small, like you're trying to disappear into the background of your own wedding. I'm just overwhelmed. It's a big day. He kissed my forehead. Your mother and I raised you to take up space, not shrink from it. Don't forget that. But I did forget. Slowly. One small accommodation at a time. The honeymoon was in Paris. Dorian's choice, of course. He wanted to show me culture, sophistication, all the things I'd supposedly missed growing up in my simple life. We stayed in expensive hotels, ate at restaurants where the menus had no prices, visited museums where he explained art to me like I was a student needing instruction. See the brushwork there, Clara? That's Monet. This is the kind of thing my colleagues discuss at dinner parties. You should familiarize yourself. I nodded, memorized, tried to absorb this new world I'd married into. What I didn't tell him was that my grandmother had taken me to museums throughout my childhood, that I'd written a paper on Impressionism in college, that I understood art just fine. Thank you very much. But he seemed so eager to teach me, to shape me into the wife he envisioned. And I was so eager to be loved. We returned home to the house Dorian had bought. For bedrooms, marble countertops, a view of the city. It was beautiful in that sterile, magazine-perfect way. Nothing like my parents' home where every corner held memories, where the furniture was comfortable instead of impressive. This is just the beginning, Dorian said, pulling me close in our empty living room. I'm going to give you everything, Clara. A life you never imagined. What he meant, I realized later, was a life he imagined. Not me. The first dinner party came 2 months after the wedding. Dorian's colleagues and their wives, 8 people total, sitting around our formal dining table eating catered food because Dorian said my cooking was too homestyle for this crowd. I wore a cocktail dress he'd picked out. Laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. Listened to conversations about market trends and vacation homes, and which private schools had the best connections. One of the wives, a woman named Bethany with perfect blonde hair, leaned toward me during dessert. So, Clara, what do you do? I'm taking some time to settle into married life. But I studied business administration in college. Oh, how practical. Dorian's so lucky to have someone grounded. These men need someone to keep them humble, don't they? She smiled, but her eyes said something else. Something like, "You're not one of us, but we'll tolerate you because Dorian chose you." After they left, I helped clear the table. Dorian loosened his tie, poured himself scotch. "You did well tonight," he said. "Just try to smile more next time. You looked nervous." I was nervous. Don't be. They're just people. But they weren't just people. They were his people. His world. A world I was supposed to fit into without changing its shape. My grandmother called the next morning. "How was the dinner party?"
Fine.
"Good." Everyone was nice. Silence on the line. Then, "Clara Valen, I raised you better than to lie to me." I started crying. Couldn't help it. "I don't fit, Grandma. I don't know how to be what he needs." "Baby girl, listen to me carefully. The right person doesn't need you to fit. They make space for who you already are." "But I love him." "Love isn't enough if it requires you to disappear." She was right, of course. But I wasn't ready to hear it yet. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of adjustments. I changed my wardrobe, my hair, my vocabulary. Started reading the financial section to understand Dorian's work conversations. Took cooking classes to make meals that would impress his colleagues, then stopped cooking entirely when he kept ordering catering instead. Every change was small, easy to justify. Just compromises couples make, right? But my grandmother's voice kept whispering in my memory. The warning she'd given me on my wedding day, squeezing my arm with surprising strength. "Diamonds shine bright, Clara, but pressure reveals cracks." I'd thought she meant I needed to be strong, to withstand pressure. But standing in our beautiful, empty house, wearing clothes that weren't mine, preparing for another dinner party with people who looked through me like glass, I finally understood. She wasn't talking about diamonds at all. She was talking about coal. About things that look solid until pressure exposes what they really are. About Dorian. The cracks were already there. I just wasn't ready to see them yet. But my grandmother had taught me patience, had taught me to watch, wait, and learn. So that's what I did. For 2 more years. Watching, waiting, learning exactly who I'd married. The erosion happened so slowly, I almost didn't notice I was disappearing. It started with words. Small corrections wrapped in concern, delivered with that smile that made me doubt my own reactions. "Clara, maybe don't mention your mother's bakery at dinner tonight. These people won't really understand small business. That dress is lovely, but the other wives usually wear brighter colors. You don't want to look like you're not trying. Let me handle this conversation. Investment banking is complicated, and I don't want you to feel lost." Each comment was a drop of water. Gentle, easy to dismiss. But water on stone works slowly, wearing away what seemed permanent until suddenly there's nothing left but smooth emptiness. I stopped talking about my childhood. Stopped suggesting restaurants I liked. Stopped offering opinions in conversations unless specifically asked, and then only if I was certain my answer matched what Dorian expected. I became an echo, a reflection, a carefully crafted version of myself that fit the shape of his expectations. The dinner parties became regular events. Every month, sometimes twice. Always the same people. Always the same performance. I learned to smile at the right moments, laugh at tired jokes, ask the wives about their children and their charity work while the men discussed business in another room. "You're getting better at this," Dorian said one night after everyone left. "Bethany mentioned how gracious you were tonight." I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt hollow. Like I'd passed a test I never wanted to take. My mother called every Sunday. "How are you, sweetheart? You sound tired." "Just busy. Dorian's career is really taking off. Lots of networking." "And what about your career?" "I'm still figuring that out." Silence. My mother knew me too well to buy that excuse. But she didn't push. Just said, Your grandmother wants to talk to you. Grandma's voice came on the line, sharp as ever. Stop lying to your mother. I'm not. You are. You're doing that thing where you make yourself small so everyone else feels comfortable. I taught you better than that, Clara. I'm just adjusting. Marriage requires compromise. Compromise means both people bend. Not one person folding herself into nothing while the other stays exactly the same. I changed the subject. Told her about some property investment opportunity I'd been researching, using the inheritance she'd left me. That got her excited, distracted her from questions about my marriage. But after we hung up, her words stayed with me. One person folding into nothing. Was that what I was doing? The second year of marriage brought more changes. Dorian got promoted, which meant more dinners, more parties, more networking events where I stood beside him like an accessory chosen to match his tie. At one particularly painful cocktail party, I overheard two of his colleagues talking near the bar. Hale's doing well. Smart moves on the Henderson account. Yeah, though I'm surprised about his wife. She's so plain. Expected him to marry someone with more presence. She's sweet though.
Quiet.
Probably lets him be the star at home too. They laughed. I stood 10 feet away, holding my champagne, invisible.
Plain.
Quiet. Someone who lets her husband be the star. I wanted to walk over, tell them I had a degree in business administration, that I managed a multi-million-dollar property portfolio they knew nothing about. That quiet wasn't the same as empty. But I didn't. I smiled, sipped my champagne, and wondered when I'd become someone who accepted being discussed like furniture. That night, Dorian and I fought for the first time. Really fought, not just the small disagreements we'd had before. Did you hear what your colleagues said about me tonight? I asked when we got home.
What? Who?
Stevens and Marchand. They call me plain. Said they were surprised you married someone without more presence. Dorian loosened his tie, looking uncomfortable. Clara, they've had too much to drink. You can't take that stuff seriously. But do you agree with them?
What? No.
Of course not. Then why didn't you defend me? You were standing right there. I didn't hear them, Clara. And even if I had, making a scene wouldn't have helped anything. These relationships matter for my career. And I don't. He sighed like I was being difficult. You're being sensitive. This is how these people are. If you let every comment bother you, you'll be miserable. Maybe I'm already miserable. That stopped him. He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment I thought he might finally see me. The real me, not the version he'd been molding. But then he shook his head. You're tired. Let's not do this tonight. And just like that, my feelings were dismissed as exhaustion. My concerns reduced to oversensitivity. My reality erased because it was inconvenient for him. I cried in the bathroom that night, water running to cover the sound. Looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Where had Clara Valen gone? The girl who'd written her own college thesis, managed her grandmother's properties, dreamed of building something meaningful? She'd been eroded. Drop by drop, comment by comment, dismissed feeling by dismissed feeling. But here's what Dorian didn't know. Erosion works both ways. Yes, water wears down stone. But it also reveals what's underneath. Strips away the surface to show the truth beneath. And the truth was, I'd been keeping score. Every dismissal, every correction, every time he'd chosen his comfort over my dignity. I noted it all, filed it away in some deep place I didn't fully understand yet. My grandmother called the next morning. She had a way of knowing when I needed her. Your inheritance from me, she said without preamble, was never just about money, Clara. It was about options. Freedom. The ability to walk away from anything that diminishes you. I know, Grandma.
Do you?
Because from where I'm sitting, you're letting that boy treat you like you're lucky to be there. Like he's doing you a favor by putting up with you. He's my husband. And you're his wife. That should mean something to him too. After we hung up, I pulled out the files on my properties. Looked at the numbers, the growth, the quiet empire I'd been building while everyone assumed I spent my days shopping and having lunch. The club property downtown caught my eye. The building that housed Dorian's precious gentleman's club. I owned 51% of it, had for years, but I'd never interfered with management. Just collected the rent, let the board run things. But maybe it was time to pay more attention. Maybe it was time to remember who I really was. The water was still falling, still eroding, but I was starting to realize something important. I wasn't the stone being worn down. I was the water. Patient, persistent, powerful.
And Dorian?
He was the stone. Solid and confident now, but getting weaker with every drop.
He just didn't know it yet.
Have you ever felt yourself disappearing in a relationship? Ever caught yourself wondering who you became and why you let it happen? That's where I was. Lost, eroded, almost gone. But not quite. Because underneath all those changes, all that bending and folding, the real Clara was still there. Waiting. Watching. Taking notes. And she was getting very, very tired of being quiet. The inheritance had always been my secret weapon, but I'd kept it holstered for so long I'd almost forgotten it was loaded. 3 years into my marriage, sitting at my desk in the spare bedroom Dorian called, "Your little office." I finally pulled out every file. Property deeds, investment statements, management reports. The full scope of what my grandmother had built and left specifically to me. For apartment complexes across 3 cities. Commercial properties generating steady income. And the crown jewel, majority ownership in the historic Brennan building downtown, home to offices, restaurants, and on the top 3 floors, the exclusive Manchester Club. Dorian's Club. The place where he went every Thursday for lunch, every other Friday for networking dinners, where he'd hosted potential clients and kissed up to partners who could advance his career. My club. Legally, financially, completely mine. I'd let it run itself for years, content with the management company's reports and the steady deposits into my accounts. But that Tuesday night when Dorian told me I was too plain, too embarrassing, too much of a liability to be seen at his gala, something clicked. Why was I hiding what I'd built? Why was I pretending to be less than I was? Because he'd asked me to, that's why. Not in words, exactly, but in every comment, every correction, every subtle message that I should shrink myself to make him comfortable. Well, I was done shrinking. Wednesday morning, I called my lawyer, Martin Chun. He'd been managing my grandmother's estate for years, a sharp man in his 60s who'd never once asked why I kept my finances separate from my husband. "Martin, I want to take a more active role in the Brennan building, specifically the Manchester Club." "Interesting timing," he said. "The current board chairman, Richard Walsh, mentioned last month that he'd like to meet with ownership. There are some updates he wants approval for. Shall I arrange it?"
Yes.
"And Martin, I'd like this done properly. Full announcement at their next major event. Make it official." I could hear the smile in his voice. "The Winter Gala is in 10 days. That's their biggest event of the year." "Perfect. Set it up." Thursday, I met with Patricia Moreno, the club's general manager. She was a woman in her 40s, professional and warm, who'd been running the day-to-day operations for 15 years. "Mrs. Hale," she said, standing when I enter her office. "This is unexpected. We've never had the pleasure of meeting you in person." "I know. That changes now. Walk me through everything. Operations, finances, membership, plans for the future."
For 2 hours, she briefed me.
The club was profitable, prestigious, exclusive. But there were issues. The board, mostly old men who liked things traditional, had been blocking modernization. They'd rejected Patricia's proposals for updated facilities, more diverse programming, community outreach. "They think change threatens the club's exclusivity," Patricia said carefully. "But exclusivity without evolution is just stagnation." I liked her immediately. "What would you do if you had full support from ownership?" Her eyes lit up. "Renovate the gym and spa. Start a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. Host more diverse events. Make this place feel less like a museum and more like a living, breathing community. Make it happen. You have ownership's full support." She blinked. "Just like that. Just like that. Send me the proposals. I'll review them this week." "Mrs. Hale, can I ask why now? Why get involved after all these years?" I smiled. Let's just say I've been reminded that staying quiet doesn't always serve your best interests. That evening, Dorian came home excited. Clara, great news. The Manchester Gala is next Saturday. I finally got us on the list.
This is huge for me.
Thompson will be there, and Henderson, and possibly even old man Brennan himself. I looked up from my laptop. Brennan? As in the Brennan building? Yeah, he owned it for decades. Sold it years ago, but still comes to major events. Guy's loaded. If I can get FaceTime with him, it could open doors. I turned back to my screen, hiding my smile. Sounds important. It is. Which is why. He sat down across from me, his expression serious. Clara, I need you to understand something. This gala isn't like our usual dinners.
These are the top people in my field.
Your appearance, your behavior, everything matters. My appearance? You know what I mean. Look nice, but not flashy. Be pleasant, but don't try to insert yourself into conversations above your head. Just be supportive. There it was again. That casual dismissal wrapped in concern. Stay small, stay quiet, stay in your lane. What if my lane is bigger than you think? I asked softly.
He laughed.
What? Nothing. I'll be appropriate. I promise. He kissed my forehead, already moving on to check his phone. That's my girl. This could be the night that changes everything for us. He had no idea how right he was. The next week, I moved in careful silence. Dorian prepared for his big night, oblivious to the fact that I was preparing too. Legal documents were signed. The club board was notified. Patricia coordinated with Richard Walsh on the announcement timing. Are you sure about this? Martin asked during our final meeting Friday afternoon. Once this becomes public, there's no taking it back. Your husband will know everything. I'm sure. He spent 3 years telling me who I should be. Time for him to learn who I actually am. That night, Dorian practiced his elevator pitch in the bathroom mirror. I could hear him through the door, rehearsing how he'd introduce himself to Brennan, to Thompson, to anyone who could boost his career. It never occurred to him to ask about my day, about what I'd been doing all week, about anything that mattered to me. Why would it? In his mind, I was just the plain wife who needed managing, the schoolteacher's daughter playing dress-up in his world. Tomorrow night, he'd learn differently. Tomorrow night, every person in that club would bow to me. And Dorian would finally understand the cost of dismissing someone you should have cherished. My grandmother's voice whispered through my memory one more time. Pressure reveals cracks, Clara. But it also creates diamonds. Remember that. I was done being cracked. Tomorrow I would shine. The week before the gala moved like molasses. Dorian strutted around our house like a peacock preparing for mating season. He tried on 3 different tuxedos, spent an hour debating cufflinks, and practiced his handshake in the mirror. Yes, his handshake. Like he was preparing for a presidential debate instead of a dinner party. This is huge for me, Clara, he said Tuesday morning, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. Reynolds from the investment committee will be there. Henderson from acquisitions. This could mean partner track by next quarter. I nodded from the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching him preen. Are you even listening? He snapped. Every word. I lied. Truth was, I couldn't hear him over the roar of satisfaction building in my chest. While he obsessed over Italian cufflinks, I'd spent Monday morning in my lawyer's office, signing papers that made me the official chairwoman of the club's ownership board. My name was now on every document, every lease, every decision that mattered. The club manager, a sharp woman named Patricia, who'd worked there for 15 years, had smiled when I'd visited her Wednesday afternoon. Mrs. Hale, she'd said, shaking my hand firmly, we've been waiting for someone like you to take real interest in this place. The previous owner was hands-off. We're excited to work with you. Call me Clara, I'd said. And I think Saturday's gala will be the perfect time to announce the transition. Her eyes had lit up with understanding. She knew my husband. She knew exactly what this meant. Perfect timing, she'd agreed. Now it was Friday night, 24 hours until the moment I'd been building toward. Dorian was in his study, probably rehearsing small talk, while I sat in our bedroom running through tomorrow's plan for the 100th time. The chairman would make the announcement during dinner. Standard procedure for ownership changes at the club. Except this wouldn't be standard at all. I laid out my dress for tomorrow. Black, elegant, simple. Exactly what Dorian expected. Nothing that would draw attention or embarrass him. Just his plain wife, staying in her lane. I smiled at my reflection. Tomorrow, every lane would be mine. Dorian came to bed late, smelling like expensive cologne and ambition. He didn't kiss me goodnight. Just turned over and fell asleep within minutes, probably dreaming of partnerships and corner offices. I lay awake, my grandmother's voice filling the darkness. Patience, Clara. The sweetest revenge is the one they never see coming. Saturday morning arrived with autumn sunshine streaming through our windows. Dorian was up at dawn, jogging, showering, grooming himself like he was going to meet royalty. I made breakfast, played the dutiful wife, listened to him talk about seating arrangements and who he needed to impress. Remember, he said as we finished eating, his voice dropping into that tone I'd grown to hate. Tonight is important. Smile, be pleasant, but don't insert yourself into conversations above your understanding. These are sophisticated people, Clara. Just follow my lead. Of course, I said softly. I wouldn't dream of embarrassing you. Something in my tone must have sounded off because he looked at me sharply. But I kept my face neutral, innocent, and after a moment he relaxed. Good, he said. The car arrives at 7. The afternoon dragged. I did my makeup carefully, nothing dramatic. Curled my hair loosely. Put on the black dress and simple pearl earrings my mother had given me for my wedding. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what Dorian wanted to see. A woman who knew her place. What he couldn't see was the warrior underneath. The woman who'd spent 3 years learning commercial real estate, building relationships with property managers, and quietly accumulating power while everyone assumed she was just spending her days shopping and having lunch. The car arrived at 7 sharp. Dorian barely glanced at me as we climbed in, too busy checking his phone, firing off last-minute emails. I watched the city pass by the window, each block bringing us closer to the moment that would change everything. The club rose before us like a cathedral. Stone columns, glowing windows, valets in crisp uniforms opening doors. I'd seen pictures, of course, but I'd never actually been inside. Women weren't typically invited except for special events like tonight. Dorian offered his arm as we walked up the steps, more for appearance than affection. The doorman nodded to him, then did a double take when he saw me. He knew. Patricia must have briefed the staff. Inside, the club was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers threw light across marble floors. Oil paintings of dead rich men lined the walls. Waiters moved silently with champagne trays. And everywhere, Dorian's colleagues. The men who'd barely noticed me at parties. The ones who'd talked past me like I was wallpaper. Tonight, they'd learn my name. Dorian guided me through the crowd, stopping every few feet to shake hands, laugh too loudly, position himself in important conversations. I followed quietly, exactly as expected, until the dinner bell rang. We moved into the dining room, found our assigned seats. Dorian was vibrating with excitement, scanning the room for the partners who could make or break his career. The chairman stood at the head table, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the space, before we begin this evening's celebration, we have an important announcement regarding the club's future. Dorian leaned forward, probably wondering if this would affect his networking opportunities. The chairman smiled, looking directly at me. As many of you know, ownership of this historic property has been in transition. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce you to our new majority owner and chairwoman of the board. The room held its breath. Please welcome Mrs. Clara Valenhale. Every head turned. Every eye found me. And Dorian, my confident husband who'd told me I was too plain for this room, made it sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking crystal was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Time slowed down in the most delicious way. I stood, smoothing my simple black dress, and walked to the front of the room. Every step felt like walking through water, thick with shock and surprise radiating from 100 stunned faces. But I kept my head high, my smile soft, my movements calm. Exactly like my grandmother taught me. Behind me, I heard Dorian's chair scrape against the floor. Heard him try to speak, but no words came out. Just a strangled gasp that made several people turn to look at him. The chairman extended his hand as I reached the podium. "Mrs. Hale, welcome." "Thank you, Richard," I said, and I watched eyebrows raise throughout the room. First names. Familiar. Like I'd been here all along, just waiting for them to notice. I turned to face the crowd. Dorian's colleagues, the same men who'd ignored me at parties, suddenly sat at attention. Their wives, the ones who'd given me those curious looks, now stared with something between respect and fear. And Dorian. God, Dorian looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face had gone white except for 2 spots of red on his cheeks. Rage or embarrassment or both, I couldn't tell. Didn't care. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady. "This club has been part of my family's holdings for several years, and I'm honored to take a more active role in its future. My grandmother believed in patience, in watching and learning before acting. I've spent considerable time understanding this community, and I look forward to working with each of you to maintain the excellence this establishment represents." Polite applause rippled through the room. But underneath it, I could feel the current of shock, confusion, recalculation. These men were investors, dealmakers. They were already adjusting their mental files, rearranging where I fit in their hierarchy. Not as Dorian's plain wife. As someone who mattered. "I know change can be unexpected," I continued, and I let my eyes drift to my husband. "But sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones no one sees coming." More applause, stronger this time. Several men stood. Then more. Until the entire room was on its feet, raising glasses in my direction. To Mrs. Hale, someone called out. To Clara, another voice added. Dorian remained seated, frozen, while everyone around him stood and toasted the wife he'd told to stay in her lane. I returned to my seat as dinner was served. The woman beside me, wife of some hedge fund manager, leaned over with genuine warmth. "Clara, I had no idea. How wonderful. You must tell me about your plans for the club's charity initiatives." The man across from me, one of Dorian's senior partners, raised his glass. "Mrs. Hale, I'd love to discuss some investment opportunities with you next week. Your grandmother clearly had excellent instincts. I'd be honored to learn about your portfolio." They kept coming. Question after question, compliment after compliment, treating me like I'd always been someone worth talking to. Because now I was. Money talks. Power speaks. And I had both. Dorian sat silent beside me, cutting his steak with jerky, aggressive movements. His jaw was so tight, I thought he might crack a tooth. During dessert, Marcus Reynolds, the investment committee head Dorian had been desperate to impress, walked over to our table. Dorian straightened immediately, putting on his charming smile. "Reynolds, good to see you," Dorian started. But Reynolds looked past him. "Mrs. Hale, I wanted to introduce myself properly. Marcus Reynolds. I've heard impressive things about your family's investment strategy. I'd love to buy you lunch next week and discuss potential partnerships." He handed me his card.
Not Dorian. Me.
"I'd be delighted, Marcus," I said warmly. Reynolds nodded to Dorian as an afterthought. "Hale, good seeing you." Then he walked away, leaving Dorian holding his fork like a weapon. The evening continued like that. Person after person approaching me, building bridges, offering connections, treating me with the respect Dorian had insisted I didn't deserve. And with each interaction, I watched my husband shrink a little more. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, Dorian grabbed my elbow and steered me toward a quiet corner. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his charm completely gone. "You made me look like an idiot. Everyone thinks I married you for your money." I met his eyes calmly. "Interesting assumption, Dorian. Why would they think that?" "Because you blindsided me. You humiliated me in front of the most important people in my career." "I didn't humiliate you," I said softly. "I simply showed them who I've always been. The person you were too busy dismissing to actually see. You should have told me, he demanded. I'm your husband. And you told me I was too plain for your colleagues. That I should stay in my lane. I smiled. That same smile I'd given him in our kitchen. I'm just following your advice, Dorian. Staying in my lane. This is my lane. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once in his life, Dorian Hale had nothing to say. Come on, I said, touching his arm gently. Let's go home. You look tired. We rode back in silence, the city lights flashing past our windows. Dorian stared straight ahead, his hands clenched in his lap. I watched him struggle with the reality that had just crashed down on his perfect little world. The woman he'd spent years correcting, dismissing, and tolerating was actually the one holding all the cards. And she just played her hand. When we got home, he went straight to his study and slammed the door. I heard the whiskey bottle come out, heard him pacing, probably replaying every conversation from tonight, trying to figure out how he'd missed this. I went to bed alone, feeling lighter than I had in years. My grandmother's voice whispered approval in the darkness. Well done, child. Well done. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Dorian wouldn't accept this quietly. But tonight I'd won. Tonight, every man in that room had bowed to the woman Dorian once called too plain. And the look on his face when that glass slipped from his hand? That was worth 3 years of silent suffering. The morning after the gala arrived with uncomfortable sunshine. I woke alone. Dorian's side of the bed hadn't been slept in, which meant he'd probably passed out in his study with the whiskey bottle. Part of me felt guilty. The part that had loved him once, that had tried so hard to be enough for him. But that part was getting smaller every day. I made coffee, checked my phone, and found 17 new messages. Investment opportunities. Lunch invitations. Welcome messages from club board members. Requests for meetings from people who'd looked right through me at parties just last month. One message stood out. From Patricia, the club manager. Clara, brilliant last night. The staff is thrilled. When you're ready, we have some ideas about modernizing the facilities that previous ownership kept blocking. Looking forward to working with real leadership. Real leadership. Not Dorian's leadership. Mine. I was replying when I heard his study door open. Heavy footsteps. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing yesterday's tuxedo pants and wrinkled shirt. His hair stood up at odd angles. His eyes were bloodshot. We need to talk, he said. Coffee? I offered. I don't want coffee, Clara. I want answers. He moved closer, and I could smell the whiskey still on him. How long have you been planning this? This whole humiliation. I wasn't planning anything, Dorian. I've owned that property for years. The timing of the announcement was the board's decision. Don't lie to me. You orchestrated that whole thing. Waited until my most important career night to embarrass me. I set down my phone, met his eyes. Did it occur to you that my ownership has nothing to do with you? That maybe my life, my inheritance, my business decisions don't revolve around your career? He laughed, but it was ugly. Everything you have is because of me. I gave you access to this world. I introduced you to these people.
You introduced me to them, yes.
Then told me I was too plain to matter to them. Too simple to understand their sophisticated conversations. Too embarrassing to be seen as your equal. I was trying to help you, to protect you from looking foolish. By making me feel foolish instead? He slammed his hand on the counter. I built my reputation from nothing. My father squandered half our family money on bad investments and affairs. I clawed my way into that firm, worked 80-hour weeks, kissed ass, played politics. And now you've made me look like I married for money. Like I'm some gold digger. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. Dorian, you didn't marry me for money because you didn't know I had any. You married me because I made you feel superior. Because you could mold me and correct me and improve me like some project that proved how sophisticated you were. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my day? My interests? My thoughts on anything that mattered? You've spent 3 years treating me like an accessory that needed constant adjustment. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw something crack behind his eyes. Not remorse exactly. More like recognition. Like he'd just realized I'd been keeping score this whole time. "So what now?" he asked quietly. "You're going to divorce me? Take everything?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know I'm done being dismissed. By you, or anyone else." My phone buzzed. Another message, this time from Marcus Reynolds. "Clara, wonderful meeting you properly last night. Lunch, Wednesday at Marcello's? We should discuss the waterfront development project. Your perspective would be invaluable." I showed Dorian the screen. Watched him read it. Watched his face tighten. "That project," he said slowly. "I've been trying to get on that for 6 months. Henderson keeps blocking me." "Maybe you should ask nicer," I said. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Dorian's colleagues started treating me differently. Not as his wife, but as Clara Valenhale, property owner, investor, someone worth knowing independent of my husband. They called me directly now. Invited me to meetings. Asked my opinion on deals and opportunities. Some of them, I suspected, were genuinely interested in my business acumen. Others just wanted access to my holdings. Either way, they saw me. And every time someone chose me over Dorian, I watched him shrink a little more. His promotion to partner track? Delayed indefinitely. Henderson cited restructuring. But everyone knew the real reason. The firm's politics had shifted. The men making decisions were suddenly more interested in courting Clara Hale than promoting Dorian Hale. He started working later, coming home angry, drinking more. We barely spoke except to fight. "You're destroying my career," he accused one night. "I'm building mine," I corrected. "They're not the same thing. They are when everyone sees you as the power in this marriage. And that bothers you? That I have power?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Wednesday afternoon, I met Marcus Reynolds for lunch. Marcello's was the kind of restaurant where deals got made over expensive wine. Marcus was already there, standing when I arrived, pulling out my chair. "Clara, thank you for making time. I've been reviewing your family's portfolio. Impressive diversification." We talked for 2 hours. Real business, real strategy, real respect. He listened when I spoke, took notes, asked intelligent questions about my vision for the properties. "You know," he said as we finished dessert, "your husband's been trying to get my attention for months. Interesting that you got it instead." I smiled. "Maybe I'm just more interesting." He laughed. "Maybe you are." When I got home, Dorian was waiting in the living room. "How is lunch with Reynolds?" "Productive. We're discussing partnership on the waterfront project." Something dark crossed his face. "I've been pursuing that project for half a year." "Then I'm sure you understand how exciting it is." "This is deliberate, Clara. You're sabotaging me."
No, Dorian.
"I'm just not staying in my lane anymore." He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw it clearly.
He didn't love me.
Maybe he never had. He loved what I represented. The quiet woman who made him feel important by being less than him. Now that I was more, he didn't know what to do with me. His world was crumbling, one respectful greeting at a time. Every person who bowed to me was one less person bowing to him. And the worst part, the part that probably killed him most? He'd done this to himself. With 4 words in a kitchen on a Tuesday night. The quiet one he dismissed was rising. And his fall had only just begun. The unraveling of Dorian Hale happened slowly, then all at once. November came with cold winds and colder shoulders. I watched my husband lose pieces of himself like leaves falling from a tree. First the confidence, then the swagger. Finally, the desperate charm he'd always relied on to smooth over his shortcomings. The investment firm where he'd worked for 8 years started excluding him from key meetings. Not officially, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he'd arrived to find decisions already made, deals already structured, his input no longer required. "They're pushing me out," he said one night, staring into another whiskey. "Henderson barely looks at me anymore. Reynolds canceled our golf game. Even junior associates are dodging my calls." I didn't respond. What could I say? That actions have consequences? That treating people like they're beneath you eventually comes back around? He already knew. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was how completely the social structure around him would shift once I stepped out of his shadow. These men, his colleagues and competitors, weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to power. And I had something he didn't. Real assets. Real holdings. Real influence that didn't depend on kissing the right ass or playing the right politics. The club became his personal hell. He couldn't stop going. That would have been admitting defeat, but every visit reminded him of that gala night. The staff treated me with deference now. Board members consulted me on decisions. Even the bartender knew my drink order. Dorian was just another member. I was the owner. The week before Thanksgiving, he came home early. Unusual for him. I was in the study, reviewing renovation proposals for one of the apartment buildings, when he appeared in the doorway. "They're not going to make me partner," he said flatly. "Henderson told me this morning. Said the firm's going in a different direction." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not for him, exactly, but for the waste of it all. The energy he'd spent climbing a ladder that fell over the moment he got near the top. "Are you, though?" He moved into the room, his voice rising. "Are you really sorry, Clara? Or is this what you wanted all along?" "What I wanted was respect. From my husband. From the people you insisted I impress. Instead, you told me I was too plain to matter. So you destroyed my career as revenge?" "I didn't destroy anything, Dorian. You built your career on relationships that were always transactional. The moment someone more valuable came along, they moved on. That's not my fault." "You could help me," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. "You could put in a good word with Reynolds. With Henderson. Tell them you want me on their projects." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm your husband. Are you?" I set down my pen. "When's the last time you treated me like a wife? When's the last time we had a real conversation? When did you last ask what I wanted instead of telling me what you expected?" He had no answer. "I'll help you, Dorian. But not by begging your colleagues to respect you. That has to be earned. I'll help you figure out what comes next. But only if you're willing to admit that what came before wasn't working." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the Clara he thought he knew had never really existed. Just a woman playing a role, trying to fit into spaces too small for her. December brought more changes. Dorian took a job at a smaller firm, less prestigious, less money, but it was something. He started therapy, surprisingly. Told me his counselor said he had control issues and status anxiety. I could have told him that for free. We moved into separate bedrooms. Not officially separating, but not really together either. Existing in the same house like cordial roommates figuring out what comes next. The club had its annual winter gala. Dorian didn't want to attend, but I insisted. "You need to show your face. Prove you're not hiding." We arrived separately. He'd driven himself. I'd come with Patricia to discuss final details for the event. The room looked beautiful, holiday lights reflecting off polished wood and crystal. And something strange happened. People greeted Dorian warmly. Not with the desperate networking energy from before, but with genuine friendliness. Like they'd stopped seeing him as competition and started seeing him as just another person. Maybe that's what he'd needed all along.
To stop performing.
To stop pretending. Midway through the evening, I found him on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "It's weird. I spent years trying to impress these people. Now that I've stopped trying, they're actually nicer to me. Maybe they can finally see you. The real you, not the performance." He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "I'm sorry, Clara. For everything. For making you small so I could feel big. For not seeing what I had until I lost it." "You haven't lost everything, Dorian. You've just lost the illusion. Is there any chance?" He started, then stopped. "Could we start over? Differently this time?" I thought about my grandmother. About her wisdom, her patience, her warning to wait and watch before trusting. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we can start with being honest. Really honest. About who we are and what we want." He nodded. "I'd like that." I don't know if Dorian and I will make it, if you can rebuild something this broken. But I know I'll never again make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. The club board voted last week to expand our charitable programs. My idea, my vision, my leadership. And when the vote came in, Dorian was there. He clapped, genuinely, and for the first time since that night in our kitchen, I saw him smile at me with something like pride. Not in himself. In me. Maybe that's where healing starts. When the person who broke you finally sees the strength they tried to crush. The road ahead is uncertain. But it's my road. My lane. My choice. And nobody, not even my husband, will ever tell me to stay quiet again. 6 months after the gala, I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair on our back porch, watching spring rain wash the city clean. So much had changed. The apartment buildings I owned were renovated now, filled with tenants who could actually afford the rent because I'd kept prices reasonable. The club had started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, something I'd pushed through despite resistance from the old guard. My mother's bakery had expanded into 2 new locations with my financial backing, though she still insisted on baking every morning at the original 5th Street shop.
And Dorian?
He was inside making dinner. Something he'd never done in all our years of marriage. We were trying slowly to build something real from the wreckage of what we'd had before. Some days were good. Others reminded me why separate bedrooms existed. But we were honest now.
Raw.
Learning who we actually were instead of who we'd pretended to be. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Clara, just got another inquiry about your investment strategy. They're calling you the quiet mogul. Thought you'd find that funny. I smiled. The quiet mogul. My grandmother would have loved that. Because that's what this whole story is really about. Not revenge, though that was satisfying. Not even power, though I won't pretend that didn't feel good. It's about respect. About refusing to be diminished. About knowing your worth even when everyone around you insists you're worthless. Dorian had told me to stay in my lane. What he didn't understand was that I'd been building that lane for years, brick by brick, investment by investment, waiting for the moment when I'd need it. My grandmother taught me patience. My mother taught me resilience. My father taught me that knowledge matters more than appearances. But I taught myself the most important lesson of all. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the smartest strategy in the room. For 3 years, I watched Dorian perform. Watched his colleagues compete and position and backstab their way up invisible ladders. Watched the wives smile and compare and tear each other down with compliments that cut like knives. And I learned. Every dinner party was a masterclass. Every dismissive comment was data. Every time someone looked through me like I was invisible, I memorized exactly how they did it. So when my moment came, I knew exactly how to move. Quietly. Deliberately. With the kind of precision that only comes from years of observation. The rain picked up, drumming harder against the porch roof. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the city. I pulled my grandmother's shawl tighter around my shoulders. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. If I wish I'd handled things differently. Been louder, angrier, more dramatic about the whole thing. But noise isn't power. Drama isn't strength. Real power is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing mercy instead. Real strength is building an empire so quietly that by the time anyone notices, it's already too late to stop you. Dorian came to the door, dish towel over his shoulder. Dinner's ready. Pasta, nothing fancy. Nothing fancy sounds perfect, I said. We ate together, mostly in comfortable silence. Halfway through, he set down his fork. I talked to Reynolds today. He asked about you. Yeah? What did you tell him? That I'm married to the smartest person I've ever met, and I was too stupid to notice for 3 years. I looked at him, trying to gauge if he was performing again. But his eyes were clear.
Honest. You're learning, I said. Slowly. But yeah.
After dinner, I went back to the porch. The storm had passed, leaving everything clean and new. The city lights flickered on as dusk settled, and I thought about all the people out there right now feeling dismissed. Feeling small. Feeling like they don't matter because someone told them they're too plain, too simple, too whatever to count. I wanted to tell them what my grandmother told me, what I learned the hard way through years of quiet suffering. You matter. Even when they say you don't. Even when they look through you like glass. Even when the person who's supposed to love you most tells you to stay in your lane. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. The quiet ones are always watching. Always learning. Always building something underground that will one day break through the surface and change everything. They dismissed me because I didn't perform wealth the way they expected. Didn't flash it, flaunt it, use it as a weapon in social wars. I wore modest dresses and talked about my mother's bakery and smiled politely at their jokes. So they assumed I was nothing. That was their mistake. And when the moment came, when that club chairman introduced me as the new owner, every single one of them had to recalculate. Had to adjust their mental files. Had to admit they'd been wrong about the quiet woman in the corner. The woman who owned the room they were standing in. My phone buzzed again. Another opportunity, another meeting request, another person who'd finally noticed I existed. But I didn't answer right away. Because the most important lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about business or revenge or even justice. It was about me. I learned I didn't need Dorian's approval. Didn't need his colleagues' respect. Didn't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I'd always been.
Smart.
Patient. Powerful. The woman my grandmother raised me to become. So if you're out there right now, feeling dismissed or diminished or told you're not enough, remember this. Silence isn't surrender. Patience isn't weakness. And the person they're underestimating might just be the one who ends up owning everything. Stay quiet. Stay watchful. Stay ready. Because your moment is coming. And when it does, let them choke on their champagne while you smile that same sweet smile and take exactly what's yours. They told me to stay in my lane. But the truth is, I own the entire road. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Ever been told you weren't enough, weren't smart enough, weren't sophisticated enough to matter? Drop your story in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else who needs to hear they're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if Clara's journey reminded you of your own quiet strength, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because we've got more stories of resilience, revenge, and women who refuse to stay small coming your way. Share this with someone who needs to remember their power. Someone who's been told to dim their light. Someone who's waiting for their moment. Your time is coming. Trust me, the quiet ones always win in the end.